Okay, this is Editing Kim, and I got to the end of my video and I realized I had 2 DNFs that I wanted to talk to you about, and I forgot. But I'm doing this now, and I'm actually going to put this as my intro, so stay tuned for the rest of the video. I DNF'd A Woman Is No Man by Etof Rum. I got almost halfway through and I said I cannot read this anymore. It seemed so stereotypical to me of a repressed, prejudiced Arab American family who girls are only meant to get married and have babies. They're not meant to leave the house. It was one thing after another, and I finally had enough. It just did not work for me. The other one, which was a huge disappointment, is I started to listen to Matthew Perry's memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. I bought this on Sherp, and I ended up asking them for a refund. I thought it was such a poorly written book. It's so self-centered and vapid. I got about 20% into the book. I no longer wanted to read him talking about this massive, physically horrendous addiction and the medical issues that he's continuing to have because of it, without him having any accountability. And even 20% into the book, it's like, no. And then I read some reviews and I read how it keeps going. And I said, no, I'm still a huge Friends fan. No more desire to listen to him or listen to him read this book. So, yuck. Hello, BookTube. It's Kim at middle of the book march, and this is my Bookish week for Saturday, December 3rd. I had a pretty big week, so I'm going to kind of launch right into it. I finished 4 books. I had 2 DNFs. I've got 3 books on the go. So yeah, it's been a really big reading week. I finished out nonfiction November, and I forgot to count how many nonfiction titles I read. I think it's 5? 5 for the month of November? Something like that, which is quite a bit more than what I usually read. I am primarily a fiction reader. Last year I think I read quite a bit more nonfiction, but this year I kind of was gravitating towards my first love, which is fiction and classics. So yeah, but I did read some really great nonfiction books, and I'll start off by sharing some of those. I'm going to do this in a ranking. So the books that I read, I'm going to tell you about them, my least favorite to my most favorite. And so far, my least favorite is The Magical Language of Others by E.G. Coe, and I listened to this on audio. The author narrates the book, and I think that was a little bit of a mistake. It's her memoir. She has a very feminine, breathy voice, and her tone and her volume was almost the same through the entire audiobook. So it was almost like an ASMR situation. I was listening and I was just zoning out, and so I think I missed quite a bit of context. And I had started listening to this book months ago, and I picked it back up. I had gotten about halfway through. This is a memoir of her family. She is Korean American, and her parents were from Korea. Due to her father's job, they had the opportunity to go and work in Korea to make what they told their children was going to be a lot of money, but they would only have to be gone for a temporary amount of time. Temporary to them meant 2 to 3 years. And they left their 14-year-old daughter with her older brother, who was abusive, neglectful, was just not a fit parent figure. So her parents left for Korea and were gone actually 9 years. So they missed her entire teenage years. This book is kind of vignettes and letters back and forth between her and her mother. But the letters coming from her mother were very self-centered, encouraging in a cliche kind of way. You know, you're so strong, you're doing so well, when the entire time her mother knew nothing about her life back in California. E.J. Coe is a poet. She got through school. There's all kinds of trigger warnings in here. She was a writer. She ended up being a translator. And a lot of the letters her mother sent her were in Korean. And eventually she got to a point in her adulthood where she started translating her mother's letters. This memoir was quite forgettable for me. Like I said, had I read the book and not listened to the audio, it might have worked better for me. But even when I think about it now, the material, it was kind of forgettable. What she endured was awful and just soul crushing. I do admit that, but it wasn't that successful a memoir for me. There's a lot in the book about abuse, intergenerational trauma, having immigrant parents, trying to raise yourself as a child, what to do when you're a victim of just severe neglect and abuse, family dysfunction. So there's a lot of interesting material in this memoir, but for me, it was forgettable. So the next one I finished is The Trauma Cleaner by Sarah Krasnostein. Subtitle is One Woman's Extraordinary Life in the Business of Death, Decay, and Disorder. Sarah Krasnostein is a journalist, and this book is partly a biography and partly a memoir of a woman named Sandra Pankhurst. And Sandra is the owner of a cleaning company, a trauma cleaning company. And Sandra is also a trans woman. So Sarah wrote the book, and the chapters interchange between Sandra's story and the details of her career and her livelihood. This is set in Australia, and a lot of the material did not surprise me, only because I had seen enough episodes of the show Hoarders on, I don't remember what channel it's on, AMC or whatever. So if you've ever seen episodes of that show or ever seen news reports of hoarders on TV, you will not be surprised by a lot of the material in the book when it comes to the cleaning portion. What's the most fascinating is Sandra's life. And Sandra Pankhurst was born Peter, was adopted by an incredibly abusive family, was basically not raised. He was not fed, allowed to live with the rest of the family, including other children, physically abused, just one thing after another. Peter went and got married to a woman named Linda. They had, I think they had 2 boys. And then it wasn't until Peter was a father and entrenched in being a husband that he realized he was Sandra and he was a woman. So there's so much to analyze in Sandra's early life. There's so much to chew on, and you know, the whole time I'm reading her story, I was like, I hope she went to a lot of therapy and just got some support for this just horrific childhood. And then just Sandra's life as she discovered her transgender status, her queerness, her sexuality, and what she had to do to survive, the jobs that she had to hold. She was a prostitute in brothels. She was a sex worker. She was a dancer. She held menial labor jobs. And further on in her adulthood, she finally opened this cleaning business and actually ended up with many employees. I'm not sure if she has passed away or not. She also had a chronic illness that made it extremely difficult for her to work and to get by day to day. But the parts of the book that fascinated me the most was her personal story, was her history. The parts about the cleaning were very interesting, very difficult to read, as were the early accounts of her childhood abuse. The part about the book that had me questioning was the author's style, Sarah Krasnostein. She writes the book with a lot of detail and a lot of empathy towards Sandra. They became friends in the research and writing of the book. But Sarah ends up inserting a lot of personal thoughts and personal history, and it started to get more personal the more you read the book. And that was not what I was there for. I wanted Sandra's story, and I wanted Sandra's history. And this book could have been a little longer. I would have loved to read more about the cleaning, more instances. There's a lot of hoarding situations, a few deaths that Sandra had to deal with. Sandra and her company had to clean up. So it is very interesting. It's a very difficult read, but the author's style was kind of clunky, and I believe this is her first book, so that didn't work for me, but I definitely was glad I read that. Actually, I think these three nonfiction books are all memoirs. So, and the last nonfiction that I read is for this past week was The Erratics by Vicki Laveau Harvey. Vicki Laveau Harvey is a Canadian who ended up moving to Australia, and this is a book about her and her sister traveling back to Canada after her mother falls and breaks her hip. Now, when the sisters converge on Canada and their home that they lived in as children, they find out that their mother is in the hospital with a shattered hip, and their father is not bedridden, but needs pretty much daily care. The status of the house is very similar to a hoarding situation. They realize that their father was not being taken care of by their mother, who was obviously mentally ill. And at one point, the sisters were afraid that their mother was eventually going to kill their father, whether it was some sort of violence that would be staged to look like an accident or a poisoning or a medication overdose. And so the sisters came to Canada to try to take care of their father. But what is revealed is that the parents have disowned both of the sisters many, many years prior, which is a really interesting family dynamic, because the mother is hospitalized and won't ever come home again. She is hospitalized for physical injuries, but then they also have her evaluated for mental disorders and a mental illness because she is a danger to her husband. It's very clear reading the memoir that their mother has some sort of mental illness and undiagnosed. She eventually is deemed unworthy to go home and is put into a psychiatric facility. So she is never in contact with her husband, their father, again. And it's just the story of the sisters trying to figure out what their next steps are going to be, what they're going to do, how they're going to take care of their father, how they're going to clean out this home, what has to be done. They're not even allowed to make decisions for their parents' estate. The parents have disowned them and stopped talking to them years prior, and they put a family friend or a friend of the parents in charge of their finances and their medical decisions and the ability to sell their home. It's a really twisted family situation. Now, this book is interesting because Vicki Laveau Harvey is the older sister, and it's coming from her perspective, but she has no memories of her childhood, and so a lot of the information that we hear either came from her sister or possibly from letters or whatever. So it's a very distant perspective and a removed perspective. She can be fairly clinical in her writing and her reporting. There's a lot of pretty dark humor, which I actually enjoyed. That became funny and interesting to read those parts. And I still, too short of a book because there wasn't enough about their background. But then I go back to what I just said, that she doesn't have a memory of her childhood. So it's difficult to understand how the family got to this point where the parents weren't even speaking to their two daughters. And they had basically violently cut them out of their lives. So there's a few gaps in there for me. This got rave reviews on BookTube. I did not feel the same way about it. It's definitely a quick read. It didn't take me very long. Again, it could have been so much longer. There could have been a lot more involved here and probably would have made it more enjoyable for me. And now, the pièce de résistance is my 5-star read, which is a reread of The Count of Monte Cristo. It is so much better the second time around. I read this with the Critical Chicks. We did a read-along with several of our members. We're still doing it. I actually finished early. I'm a buddy read-along failure. Always have been. One of the best books I've ever read. I can't encourage you enough. If you have ever had a nugget of desire to read this book, but you're intimidated by its length, please pick it up anyway. Start reading the first 2 chapters. The book immediately immerses you in the story. It's 1,243 pages long, but it is so good. It is so compelling of a story. It is so magnificent in its writing, in its plotting, in the pacing. As long as it is, it's a very complex story that is so readable. It is about revenge. It is about the power of God. It is about redemption. It is about intrigue and mystery and love and family. Oh, it is just spectacular, and I wish more people would read this book. I completely understand the intimidation factor with a book this long, and it's a classic. But it is so accessibly readable. And I don't even know if that phrase makes sense, but it is. And I want to heavily encourage anyone who has a tiny spark of desire to read this book to please read it. It is worth it. It will not disappoint. There are 6 of us, I believe, reading this book, and not one of us had anything except glowing things to say about it, glowing praise. The story of Edmond Dantes, who is accused of a crime he did not commit and is jailed for 14 years in a 19th century French dungeon. And it is just a spectacular book. There's so many feelings, there's so many characters, so much connection between characters, so many things that the climaxes are perfect, the resolutions all make sense and are perfect. I love this book so much. Please read it. Go out and buy it. Buy this Penguin copy. Do not read an abridged version. This is the unabridged Penguin Classics, translated from French by Robin Buss. It is amazing, so please go out and buy it. Those are the 4 books I finished. Now, very quickly, before this gets too long, what am I currently reading? I am currently listening to This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. It is hilarious. I just started reading it. He is a young former British doctor, gave up his medical career, and this book is a series of vignettes of different situations, different medical issues, patients. It's hilarious. And again, I just started it, so I don't know if the tone changes. I don't know if it gets more serious, but it is so interesting and so funny. And he narrates the book. I love it so far on audio. I am also reading Yale Needs Women by Anne Gardner Perkins. Just exactly what the title says. When Yale opened up to women students in 1968, I think. 1968? What in the world? But if you look at the history of universities and colleges in the United States, and I'm sure around the world, the time period that they let women in is just maddening, absolutely maddening. So I'm about 15% into that book. And I finally picked up Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart, the sophomore novel from the author of Shuggie Bain. I'm getting into this. It's another one of those books that you just jump right into the story, and so far it's amazing. So have big plans for that one. That is it. Had a big reading week last week. I have nothing to report from New Hampshire, really. I didn't do anything. I stayed home most of the week. I love those weeks. And yeah, that'll be it for me. Okay, so I don't remember where I was, but I think I was asking everybody, write me a comment down below. I had a gap in there. Write me a comment down below. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you think. Ask me any questions if you have them, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.